Stealth technology, the internet, GPS in the palm of your hand, autonomous operation.
Technology is a driver of our times. Since its founding in 1958 in the midst of the Cold War, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has been a driver of technology. Welcome to Voices from DARPA, a window onto DARPA's core of program managers. Their job? To redefine what is possible. My name is Ivan Amato, and I'm your DARPA host. Today, I am pleased to be talking with retired Air Force officer and test pilot Scott Wierzbinowski, a program manager since 2016 in the agency's Tactical Technology Office. Scott will be finishing his DARPA tour of duty at the end of April, so I'm really looking forward to hearing how he might sum up his experience as a DARPA PM, that is to say, program manager. Now, just a note, we are recording our conversation from our respective locations as we do our parts to slow the spread of COVID-19. Because we're not in a recording studio, you might hear ambient sounds like traffic and birds. Now a little bit about Scott. In his 4.5 years at DARPA, Scott has overseen a portfolio of programs that are all about making warfighters more capable in the sky. One of his programs took on the long-sought dream of building an easily reusable vehicle that can deliver smallish payloads, say several tons, to space and return to the ground in simple airplane-like round trips. Another has been stepping toward aerial systems in which small fleets of unmanned aerial systems, think of these as scouts, deploy from and return to a mothership aircraft. Yet other programs center on bringing more automation into the relationship between warfighters and operators and their flying assets, in part by conferring more autonomy into and among those assets. This portfolio makes a lot of sense when you know that Scott himself has been a pilot extensively throughout his life. He was a command pilot with more than 2,000 hours, primarily in the F-16 Fighting Falcon and the AT-38 Talon, including 50 combat hours in Iraqi airspace during Operation Provide Comfort and its successor, Operation Northern Watch. For 20 years, he served in the U.S. Air Force as a test pilot, a program manager in advanced weapons systems, and an international affairs specialist. Prior to joining DARPA as a program manager, Scott was the executive director for space and advanced technologies at Mantech International Corporation, where he helped expand the company's advanced technologies strengths and forge collaborations with several organizations, including DARPA, the Department of Energy, and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Scott holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Astronautical Engineering from the United States Air Force Academy, a Master of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Alabama, another MS in Systems Engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology, and he is a graduate from the French Test Pilot School, and later I'll let him pronounce the name of that school. Scott Wierzbinowski, I'm happy to squeeze in this conversation on this mid-March day before you leave the agency at the end of next month. So thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you, Ivan. It's great to be here, and I look forward to this conversation.
Oh, me too. Let's start with your life as an airman. I understand that you were essentially born with the DNA of pilots. I'd like for you to share with me and our listeners just what it is like to grow up with planes in your everyday life.
Well, thanks. It's been interesting, let me tell you. My dad was a test pilot and flew over at Edwards Air Force Base. He was known for being the first Air Force test pilot of the X-29. And then I got into the Air Force in 1992 is when I graduated from the academy. But all three of us, my brothers, my two younger brothers, Jason and Ryan, were also pilots. Jason was a test pilot in bombers. And then my youngest brother, Ryan, was an F-16 pilot. You could probably go back even a little bit further to my grandfather, who was a tail gunner in B-17 during World War II. So there's definitely a history of us in the military, and then a focus being pilots, and then some of us being test pilots.
Wow, that's just an amazing lineage. I'm just wondering, have you ever been up in the air at the same time, in pretty much the same location with other family members in planes nearby?
There's a time over in San Antonio, Texas, where I was an instructor pilot of the AT-38. It was the exact same time that my brother was a T-6 pilot, instructor pilot, and my youngest brother was coming through becoming an F-16, learning how to become an F-16 pilot. It was during that time that I actually got to fly in a flight with my youngest brother, and it was about the same time that all three of us at least were at the same base at the same time.
Sounds like some serious sibling bonding there. So now one eye-catching element of your resume is that you graduated from France's Test Pilot School, and I can't pronounce the name of the school, so I'm going to let you do that. But so tell me the name of the school and just, tell me about that experience and how it came about.
Sure. So it's lovingly known as EPNER, and it stands for École du Personnel Navigant d'Essai et de Réception, which is just a long way of saying French Test Pilot School.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like you're fluent in French.
So now it's been several years since I've actually been able to use it in a working environment. I still have friends over in France, and I try to keep it up personally, but it's a skill set that if you don't use often, it starts to go to the wayside. But beforehand, I had taken French in school, but they actually sent me to language training, both over in Washington, D.C., and then more intense training in France prior to the course starting. And that's simply to give me an opportunity to try and get caught up, because the course, the French Test Pilot School course, was pretty much all in French. While they would fly in English, most of the time, most of the work we did was in French. And so you could just take 50 IQ points off right away by trying to speak another language while you're learning how to fly in a different aircraft or a crewed aircraft.
Right. And just one more question about the French test school experience. What's the value added for the U.S. government, for DOD, to send a person like you to a French test pilot school?
So there's several. Two of them that we could talk about real easily is the international relations. By being an exchange pilot, you allow the pilots from one side to come over and exchange views, become part of another culture, another military. And then the whole thought there is, as those relationships build over the course of a career, you always have the ability to go back to your friends on the other side. And it helps when there may be a miscommunication between one countryside and the other. And it was helpful on our part as well, because after my time over with French Test Pilot School, I was called up several times to go do additional events to help bridge the gap, if you will. One time I was an interpreter for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And so these types of relationships are meant to be long-lasting, and it's meant to help foster follow-on relationships. That's one. The second reason comes down to the schools themselves. We all have a desired end state of teaching our pilots to become test pilots, but we all do it in different ways. The French, the Brits, the Americans do it slightly differently. By having pilots go to these other schools, they're able to bring back different skill sets and then be able to provide those skill sets back to the community that they came from. And it's just a great way to crossbreed information, to be able to get different ways of learning and different perceptions of how different people do different things.
That was fascinating. And it's a little window on what it means for two countries to be allies, right? And it comes down to individuals exchanging the kind of experience that you did. And I'm sure that there's been test pilots from their countries who have been instructed over here. Very fascinating to hear about that bit of what it means to be an ally. So your portfolio of programs at DARPA clearly reflect your experience at high altitudes, flying and commanding fast and powerful aircraft. Just tell me about how your experience in the cockpit informed the way you think about aerospace technologies.
When you start off as a young pilot, several years are really spent in training the individual to become competent. You could expect at least 1 year for pilot training, probably another year to 2 years to become trained in your major weapon system, and then probably another 2 to 4 years to build up enough experience, airmanship, in order to become a flight lead or an instructor pilot. It's a huge amount of time in training to provide that to get to that skill set.
I mean, that's equivalent to what you would put in if you were getting a doctorate.
No, very much so, very much so. And so when you take a look at the amount of training necessary, one of the first questions that the Air Force and the Navy would ask is, well, how can we reduce that amount of training? Because it is very expensive. And then if you're reducing it, how do you ensure that you keep the same skill set in your pilots, in your air crew, or even improve upon that to the max extent possible? Because the airplanes are getting more difficult and more complicated in terms of the systems and the sensors. And you don't want to lose that airmanship as time goes forward. If you start focusing on the sensors, you don't want to lose the ability to actually fly the airplane. And so as we started to improve our computing capabilities and autonomy in general, it became a natural question of how much can we actually bring autonomy into the cockpit in order to augment or complement the aircrew. And that's one of the biggest thrusts that I wanted to take a look at coming into DARPA, was that partnership, the man-to-man teaming, the ability to have computers and systems work in concert with the human. And so that the two of them together become better than any of them separately.
I think we're going to return to some of those ideas when we talk about your programs. Just before we do that, I would like to hear about your experience just prior to coming to DARPA. You were at Mantech International Corporation. And also, what would be good at the end of that is to tell us your sort of how did you get to DARPA's story?
So I retired from the Air Force in 2012. And during that transition, I had always been looking at trying to become a program manager or working at DARPA. Mantech International had a couple of contracts with DARPA, and it was a way for me to at least gain an understanding of what it was like. And so I actually started as a consultant for DARPA through Mantech. This lasted on and off over the course of the 4 years that I was with Mantech International. But during that time, additional jobs came on, and I ended my time over at Mantech International as an executive director in charge of multiple contracts throughout the National Capital Region. But during my time with Mantech International, I had built up several relationships with program managers as well as the leadership over at DARPA, and made a bid to become a program manager, which was a long process in order to convince them, to explain to them how I would be a good fit for the organization and how I could bring my expertise and my skill sets to DARPA in order to better the end state of what we're trying to do from a vision perspective.
Another question just came to mind, though, when you were saying you had some sense of DARPA, you'd heard about it before you got to Mantech, so it was on your radar, as it were, even before there. And I'm wondering how, in fact, it was on your radar. When you were sitting for those thousands of hours in a cockpit, did you have interfaces with DARPA technology in some ways that you knew about?
So not as a line pilot, as an instructor pilot or a combat pilot. It doesn't really happen there. From my experience, it became more apparent as a test pilot. As you go and you start taking a look at the new technologies that you're going to incorporate into an aircraft, you start looking at the research laboratories and other agencies that can bring on those types of technologies. And that's how the idea of DARPA came to my awareness. And when I was getting one of my master's degree through the Air Force Institute of Technology, they had an exchange. Well, it was more of a fellowship with DARPA. That is ongoing right now, where we bring in officers from the services to DARPA for somewhere between 3 months and a year, let them learn what DARPA is like, and then go back to the services. And then they're able to do kind of what an exchange pilot would do, is be able to bring that awareness, that information back to other warfighters. And I had applied to that a couple of times, but was never able to make it work out due to my job, the way that my jobs had come around. And so that's how it came into awareness. So when I found out that I wasn't going to be able to reach DARPA through the Air Force, it was basically afterwards, once I retired from the Air Force, that I tried again to become a program manager.
Scott, now take us on a tour of your programs, beginning with the ones that maybe have run their course. They've had maybe beginnings, middles, and ends, and then moving on to ones that you're going to soon hand off to others since you're leaving. And that's actually a normal procedure. These are big, complex programs. They often will start in the middle of a program manager's tour of duty. And then when that program manager leaves, those programs get handed off to program managers that follow. So maybe chronologically, talk about the programs you took on or developed when you first started at DARPA, and then take us through to the end.
So it was my first boss over in DARPA TTO, the Tactical Technologies Office, that said when I became a program manager that you can show success as a program manager if you're able to start a few programs, end a few programs, and be in the middle of several programs. So you can see the whole gamut and the life of a program. And that was definitely true in my case. The first program I got was ALIAS, which is Aircrew Labor in Cockpit Automation System. And while it is a mouthful, the whole intent there was to develop and demonstrate a flexible automation toolkit for existing aircraft that enables safe crewed aircrew operations. And this was a program that was initiated from Dr. Dan Patt. When I came on board, he had seen that my skill sets really kind of was in line with what he was trying to do within the ALIAS program. And so I took that program on. And I only took it for about a year and a half before it was transitioned to another program manager. But it was a great way to get involved with a program here at DARPA. And it was right in my sweet spot in terms of how do you combine these machines and humans together in this man-to-man teaming format.
Before you actually go to another program, I just want to point out what fascinates me about ALIAS. also is how it connects to DARPA history, in the sense that one of the most famous DARPA program managers, JCR Licklider, this now goes back to the 60s, his whole vision, was human-machine collaboration and partnering, and Alias is really all about that. So it really does connect to some of the earliest times at DARPA.
It does. What was really interesting about that one, and it's still ongoing, the program is still ongoing right now. Two key demonstrations that we had there that I thought were extremely important and enlightening. The first one was where we put a robotic arm into the cockpit of a crewed aircraft, and it was able to do certain emergency procedures. And it showed the capability of these systems being able to take on the role of a pilot if the pilot became incapacitated. It was nowhere near ready for prime time, but it at least showed that capability was there. The second one, though, was really interesting, as where we automated the flight control system of an F-16 and allowed the F-16 to take control in a very scoped way, the weapon system, in order to do target tracking of the gun in this particular case. And it was a co-funded effort for that particular project between us and the Air Force Research Laboratory. It was so good and showed that the capabilities of the autopilot for tracking a gun towards a target was better than what a pilot could actually do. And because it was so good, Air Force then started coming along to take a look at how we could incorporate those types of capabilities more into programs of record. And that work is ongoing right now within the F-16 community.
Right. And just finally, before we move on to another program, is when you say programs of record, you're really referring to technology really transitioning into operational settings, which is the great finish line for DARPA, right? I mean, DARPA wants to de-risk technologies, make it seem like they really can work, and then hand it off to those who can take it all the way to a full technology and to an operational setting. So this sounds like it's really on that trajectory.
That's very true. A second program called CODE, or Collaborative Operations in a Denied Environment, was another program that I took in the end part of the program. JC Lede was a program manager, and as he left, he asked me to take on that program for the final demonstrations. It was a software-focused program in which we were taking a look at what types of algorithms can you put together and affordably put them into current systems in order to help make them fly better with autonomy in mind. So if you think about smart weapons right now, once they are launched, they basically go through a very rote path, and they don't normally talk to one another. And what we wanted to do was explore, well, if you're going into a denied environment and you had multiple autonomous systems going into that environment, and we started disconnecting the communications lines and the GPS lines, how will those systems work together? And that was very successful. We had several very complex demonstrations where we pitted multiple systems against a complex environment, and the systems were able to talk to one another and accomplish the mission in a very efficient way. It was so successful that NAVAIR, Navy, had taken that on. They transitioned it, and now they're doing further experimentation and figuring out how to incorporate that into their current programs of record.
Okay, so you've talked about Alias, you've talked about CODE, but there's a few others under your wing.
There is. Gremlins is looking at how do you do safe, effective, and efficient air recovery of smaller UAVs to a host aircraft. And now, a small UAV in this case is something in the range of 500 to 1,500 pounds. So it's a relatively large system. And what we were looking at is a large enough system that if we were to go long distances, a host aircraft can drop these systems off. They would then go into a high threat area, accomplish whatever the mission happens to be. And then given the sensors or maybe just the cost of the UAVs, you would not want them to be expendable. So any of them that survive, these attritable vehicles, could then be recovered to do it again another day. We're at the very last part of this program where we're doing our final flight tests, our final deployments to prove out that the air recovery can be safe and effective and efficient. Assuming that everything goes well with this program, we will look at transition opportunities, again, with the services, the Air Force and Navy, and specifically to bring this capability to bear.
I've seen a couple of videos and been tracking the progress of Gremlins. This is really, incredibly ambitious program. It's also been pretty harrowing because you've gotten so close to one of the achievements that you need, which is to actually bring it back into the Air Corps. You almost got there last time, right?
That is true. It's been so close. It's nail biting as you're inside the test control room watching these things happen. So it's completely different. If you're a test pilot and you're flying the aircraft, you're immersed in everything that's going on. You have control of the vehicle. But it's a completely different story when you're either the test operator or the program manager, and you're watching this on videos as they get so close. We're talking within inches of actually making the final mechanical connection. It doesn't happen, and you know that you have to go into a ground recovery. It is what flight test is. It's hard, it's dirty work, and you're constantly making fixes to change it and making changes because the assumptions that you initially start off with weren't necessarily the exact right ones. What is good about this program, though, is that we have a very strong test team, and we're constantly making improvements such that every time we get back into flight test, we're getting that much closer. Hopefully, by the end of the summer, we will have been able to show that that air recovery is feasible and should be considered part of a future capability.
Yeah, and you're sort of reminding me just of another trait of the DARPA R&D culture, which is that you guys know how hard these projects are, that you really don't go in with an expectation that everything is going to work smoothly or maybe in the optimum schedule, but that even when things don't work out, that's a win because you learn something, and then it comes back in the iteration for the next round of R&D.
It is true. It comes down to the idea that these are high risk, high payoff projects and programs. The high risk comes to the effect that it just may not work, or it won't work until after the third or the fourth or the fifth try. So having a program set up in a way that you have multiple test vehicles, or you have an understanding that it's not going to happen right the first time, that you'll need several iterations to get to a desired end state, is within normal operations. You would love it if it works out the first time, but it's not always the case.
So you're on a roll. You talked about 3 programs, but you're not done.
That's right. All right, we got 2 more. So the next program is called Experimental Spaceplane. It was one that I had taken on from another program manager, Jess Sponable. It's a departure from doing aeronautical UAVs in the context of a reusable space launch capability was really what we were focused on here. Now, this program, I actually started with Jess Sponable as a seated contractor. So I was his support contractor at the very beginning, and through the first couple of years, supported him as he accomplished the program. When he left DARPA, he asked me to come on and take on the program management role, and that's what I did through phases 2 and 3 of the program. Now, in this case, Experimental Spaceplane was not a success, and it did not transition. We went through several years of design work only to find out that at the end of the day, what we were trying to do was just too difficult given the capabilities that we had at that time. And again, this is one of those times where you, from a DARPA perspective, take a look at what is available, where money should be spent, and what is really going to be feasible given the time and the budget and the schedule that you have. And in this case, we decided to terminate the program early and focus our time and attention on other areas. Now, that does not mean that reusable space launch isn't a future capability that we want to be able to have, which is different than what you see out of SpaceX and Blue Origin. This is more tactically oriented, where you could fly a reusable space launch vehicle multiple times in multiple days in order to do different types of military missions. Now, what I would expect to happen is, as SpaceX and Blue Origin and other companies mature, there may be an ability for those technologies to on-ramp onto a militarily relevant type mission or an aircraft or spacecraft for that matter. But at this point, it wasn't deemed feasible.
Yet another theme that comes to mind there is one of the mandates of DARPA is actually to explore the landscape of the possible. But that also means discovering, those sort of envisioned technology domains that in fact are not reachable at the moment. Though you may learn lessons now that you pack away for a bit and then bring them out down the line when other parts of a technology might become available to cinch together, and then ultimately make the original capability, like in this case, flying to space and back almost like you do an airplane, make that possible. So interesting to hear about XSP, as that program was known in short. I think you've got one more, and this one was just recently announced at DARPA.
That's right. The final program that I have is called Longshot. And it's been about 4 years in coming. When I first became a program manager, I was exploring an opportunity to start a program of a trusted wingman. In this case, we were looking at UAVs that can work seamlessly with fighter aircraft, and it basically is able to augment what the fleet or what the four-ship formation can do. Over the last 4 years, that has morphed more focused on the UAV itself and its ability from a small air-launched UAV perspective to launch air-to-air weapons. It's a program that just started. We're in phase 1 where we're exploring different types of concepts in order to reach this desired end state.
When you think maybe a little utopian, you've handed this off already to another program manager, but let's say that it is a successful program and it transitions. How would you just briefly characterize the new capability that will bring to the DoD?
So this program, along with parts and pieces of the other aerospace programs that I've had, from Code to Alias to Gremlins, all kind of focus on different capabilities that provide you the ability to do distributed air operations. And at the end of the day, that's really what I'm looking at is how can you take the capabilities of our 4th generation, our 5th generation fighters and bombers, which are expensive, exquisite systems that are manned, that you don't want to throw in harm's way unless you absolutely have to. How do you expand those capabilities by bringing other systems into this package? And the capabilities that we show in each of these different programs is just one more tool set or one more idea that the warfighter can use as they decide what they want this end state to be. So from my perspective, at the end of the day, a reusable system that is unmanned, that can actually employ air-to-air, air-to-ground weapons, or electronic warfare capabilities, or do ISR, and have them teamed up with manned aircraft, where the UAVs are the ones that go into the high threat areas and the manned aircraft are the ones that are overseeing this complicated air battle happen. That is what I'm really trying to explore.
Right. And ISR, that's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR.
Yes.
Okay, so that was an amazing recap of 5 really ambitious programs. I mean, when I think about everything that's gone into these programs, including sort of defining them and then getting word out about them and making choices of performers to contract to do the actual research, all of the moving pieces, I can see that you have been busy since 2016 when you came to DARPA, and you're now about to finish up your tour of duty as a DARPA program manager. And I should point out, this is routine. You're probably average here in the length of 4 years and some, which is built into kind of the culture of DARPA. Many say that the limited stay of the program manager is part of the agency's special sauce, which is to say what helps DARPA get so much done and move so much technology from concept toward realization. But now that you are about to finish up as a program manager, I'm interested in whether you think that is true, that limited time as a program manager is an important part of the culture, and just what other lessons you have learned and expect to bring from DARPA to your subsequent professional adventures.
I wholeheartedly agree that one of the things that makes DARPA a successful organization is this idea of bringing program managers in for a short amount of time, get the work done that they envision getting done, and then leave in order for new blood to come into the culture and into the organization. And it's important by understanding that you have a very limited time in a very special place like DARPA, it becomes your priority. You focus all of your time and attention, day, night, weekends, on whatever these projects happens to be. It becomes a passion, it becomes your life. And you could do so for a 2 to 4 or 5 year period where this is everything that you're focused on. But eventually human nature takes over, and eventually people either get burnt out or they no longer have newer ideas that need to be brought to bear. And that motivation isn't necessarily gone, but it is time for other people to come in with their new ideas. And there's another nuance that happens too. You have a program and you've worked this program for a couple of years and you're focused on making it successful. But sometimes a program manager can get biased. And by bringing in new blood or a new program manager into a particular case, they may see it in a different light and may be able to make changes that the other program manager wasn't aware of, or maybe just decided that it'd be better to go down a different path. It's a double-edged sword, but I think in general, doing so where you're bringing in new program managers in to take care of programs that are ongoing as well as bringing their own in is really what makes us such a great place to work.
One of the interesting things you said there that I just want to emphasize is the human nature side, and how by cycling program managers just over timeframes of a couple of years, you actually, from an agency, institutional, DoD, just R&D, technology development perspective, you hedge against an individual in a way becoming too invested with an idea or too in love with a particular idea. By cycling out and then someone else cycling in, you can get a good critical look at previous approaches and, if need be, modify those, where it might be harder if a program manager is in for 10, 20 years or a lifetime.
Agreed. If you have a program that is a very good program, then it should be able to stand multiple program managers taking a look at it and trying to make changes, or at least refining it to the desires that the agency wants to be able to achieve. I think it's good to note, though, that DARPA doesn't normally work off of requirements. They have an end state vision in mind. They have goals and objectives that they want to achieve, and they may have to break glass in order to get to that end state to see whether or not it truly will be a revolutionary capability that the services will eventually take on.
Nicely said. So thanks, Scott, for that tour of your programs. I have to ask you, since you're leaving, what's next for you?
So I tell you, over the next, say, 4 to 6 months, I'm going to take a break. It's summertime here. We're just coming over COVID. It's time to get back out in the world, enjoy life. That's not on the tippy end of the spear. And then I'll reassess come the end of summer, beginning of fall. My wife and I are going to be going towards the Pacific Northwest and kind of start off a new life and a new career, and we'll kind of see where it goes from there.
All right. Well, the best of luck to you, and may we be in that tail end of COVID so that you and everybody else can begin to move back towards some sort of normalcy. So I do have one more question, and that's, is there anything that didn't come up during our conversation that you would like to share with me and our listeners or future program managers, anything of that sort?
So yes, it's actually to the future program managers that are out there. I've been blessed in the idea that I've been able to mentor several individuals coming in either as program managers here at DARPA or aspiring engineers who want to become program managers. And to say that DARPA is a unique, special place is an understatement. So given an opportunity to be a program manager at DARPA is a blessing. You're given a lot of leeway in terms of reaching an end state. The office expects you to be proactive in order to do what needs to be done in order to get to that end state. And so for the program managers or the aspiring program managers that are out there, don't give up. This is a place that you would want to work at. It's a place where you can achieve the visions that you might not have been able to get in the world of academia or in your offices from industry or within the military. And it's those people who want to make a change in the world, who want to try to make things better. Those are the types of people that DARPA is looking for.
Well, great. That was a really amazing discussion for me to learn all about your programs and then to hear about your inspirational pitch to those out there who might be thinking about DARPA. And it sounds like your message is go for it. So it's been a real pleasure to sneak this discussion in with you just before you're going to say goodbye to DARPA. I just want to thank you for sharing with me and listeners some stories about your life and times as an airman and as a DARPA program manager. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Ashton. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
And thanks, listeners, for sharing this time with us. I hope you join us again for the next Voices from DARPA. Thanks also to Ben Sullivan for his partnership in producing this program. For more information about the programs run by the agency's Tactical Technology Office, and to learn about other breakthrough technologies DARPA is working on, visit darpa.mil. And for links that enable you to download this podcast, go to the Voices from DARPA page on DARPA's website.